what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, June 30th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. Mike is in our control room right now. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Tomorrow's the last day of the month of June, and, of course, next Tuesday's Independence Day. Tomorrow's also Canada Day, their Independence Day, so good for you Canadians. Getting right on into it here, the current big news story right now, there's been a multiple shooting at the Bronx Lebanon Hospital in New York City, and apparently a former employee simply walked into the hospital wearing a white doctor's coat under which he had some kind of a long gun. They're saying that he used a rifle, and he shot 3 people, it's now being reported that he himself is dead. We don't know the circumstances of that, but that's where that story is going on, and that is, of course, is the big focus of the corporate media right now. Getting on into domestic politics, Susan Rice has finally agreed to testify before the House Intelligence Panel on the Russian meddling, but only in closed session. And I think they're getting very, very concerned that when they testify in open session, it becomes an instant YouTube video, and everybody who's paying attention to what's going on starts pulling it apart and saying, well, this is a misstatement because back here they said something completely different. And they're getting very, very nervous about that. Now, in public, Susan Rice is actually blaming race and gender for the scandal over this unmasking issue. She did an interview with New York Magazine, and they said, why do you think you're a target in the investigation? And she played the race card and the gender card. True liberal fashion, never accepting responsibility for one's actions. Oh, it's the racists, it's the sexists, it's whatever. No sense of personal responsibility whatsoever there. Now, interesting little article came out of Zero Hedge. As you know, Congress is getting ready to go on their 4th of July recess. And the article is basically saying the main reason Congress is getting so little done, they get 218 days off in the year 2017, and this is meant to be a chastisement that they seem to spend most of their time out on vacations or fact-finding trips and the rest of it. And obviously, they're supposed to be spending some time in their home district, but I sort of lean the other way. I mean, considering just what Congress has done, maybe we should give them 365 days off every year. I think that would be a lot less damaging for the U.S. And its economy and our lifestyles here, because they sure as heck don't seem to be working for us all that much here. Now, as you know, there's been this dropping of hints by a friend of James Comey. There's going to be a new smoking gun story that is going to be a bombshell about this whole Russiagate hacking situation. And it was delayed, and finally came on out, and it turned out to be, to use a quote from one of CNN's own people, a big nothing burger. And so the story is actually about a longtime Republican opposition researcher, 81-year-old Peter Smith, who was apparently concerned about Hillary Clinton's missing 30,000 emails, which the FBI says have gone missing. They don't know where they are. They ought to ask the NSA, right? If the NSA is doing their job, they've got them. And so this Peter Smith basically went out to chat rooms frequented by hackers, looking for somebody who might be able to help track down where these 30,000 emails went. And that is this bombshell story. And there's really nothing there. A lot of people would like to see those 30,000 emails. So, a lot of people are looking at what's going on with CNN, the New York Times, all of the corporate media, dishing out this Russiagate story, and they're obsessed with it. Somebody actually did a study and said that ever since Mueller was appointed this special counsel, the corporate media has actually devoted half of their on-air time talking about Russiagate, Russia-Link, Russia bad, Russia this, all this. They're obsessed with it. And so there's this article that came out over in 21st Century Wire asking if this is a Mockingbird redux. And the reality is, Mockingbird never went away. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Mockingbird is a long-running CIA operation. It actually began shortly after the end of World War II, when the United States was studying just how Nazi Germany was able to manipulate their public. And, of course, they did it by taking control of their media covertly, and the CIA decided they were going to do the same thing, and that was Operation Mockingbird, where they set out to control all of the corporate media by making sure that CIA assets were in those top management positions. And it actually, before the age of the Internet and the independent media, didn't really take all that many people. We're going to do a shout-out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And I'll give you one example of exactly how they controlled the news. And this goes back to that article, The Crimes of Mina, by Sally Denton and Roger Morris, which was written based on documents recovered from slain CIA drug pilot Barry Seal. And if you saw that recent History Channel presentation on America's War of Drugs, they confirm in the program Barry Seal was a drug smuggler and he worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. So Sally Denton and Roger Morris had acquired some of his documents, and based on those documents, they had written a story about the government-sanctioned gun and drug running out of Arkansas under then-Governor Bill Clinton, and focusing on that airport at Mena, Arkansas. And they were working for the Washington Post at the time, so they took the story to the Washington Post. The Washington Post's own lawyers fact-checked it and cleared it for publication. Washington Post's own lawyers said, yeah, the story is solid, we can't get sued, they're telling the truth on here, and the story was killed by then Washington Post managing editor Bob Kaiser, who was a fellow Skull and Bones alumni with George Bush. And if you have been studying the close relationship between Skull and Bones and CIA, which is even dramatized in the film The Good Shepherd, yeah, this is how they control the media. The people at the top say, you will run this story, you will not run this story. And as I said before, according to this article that came on out about this study that was done on the corporate media, and ever since Robert Mueller was appointed, the corporate media is literally devoting half their airtime on the Russia story or some form of Russia bashing or Russia hacked the DNC. It is a hard sell, the hardest of sells. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Kyle in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, we need to look at who's bringing us the media. You have Anderson Cooper Vanderbilt of the Vanderbilt family. You've got Chris Cuomo, who Cuomo's are about as corrupt as a political family get. Mika Brzezinski, daughter of Zigbig Brzezinski, however pronounce his name.
Zbigniew.
Joe Scarborough, Joe Scarborough, who had a dead intern found in his congressional office, Lori Klostidis, I believe her name was. These people are, they are the power structure. If they're too stupid to go into politics, they go into the media. And it's set up, the corporate media is set up as a pyramid scheme, where network news, cable news, all the way down to the blog, all the way down to the corporate website, they all want to get on the TV, which is what that guy from the Playboy was doing the other day. All he wanted was to get on his pat on the head from Chris Matthews to say, you did a good job. These people, it is absolutely, if it's not Mockingbird in action, it's Mockingbird in theory. And it's still being practiced, and it's the way that the corporate media is set up.
Well, again, you need to understand, Mockingbird is a big part of the problem, but then you have the corporate ownership of the media. They're owned by these large conglomerates who are pushing their agenda. Then you have influence from countries like Israel, and so there are multiple overlapping forms of control. But the net result is the corporate media exists, as Mika Brzezinski herself admitted last February, to control what you're thinking. And that's what it's set up to do. And they hire people like Cuomo and Anderson Cooper and the rest of it because they are willing to make that deal. I will lie sincerely to the American people in exchange for a really, really big paycheck. And these are people with no morals or ethics, and they're willing to do that deal. They don't feel guilty about it at all, and that's why they get these jobs.
Well, and I don't know if I heard it on your show or not, but Brian Stelter, the CNN host, lives in an apartment in New York City where the rent is $8,500 a month. Now, this man goes on a rant trying to tell you, the public, how he's the victim, how he's been assaulted by the president. Anybody who's living in an $85,000 home, or apartment, rather, you do not get, you've negotiated your way out of being a victim. It's impossible. You step into the ring, you put yourself on TV, you put your ideas out there. A lot, especially on these CNN, a lot of people aren't going to like them. And people need to understand that these people are not there for news. They're there for agenda. Mm-hmm. And everything is about creating this mythology and this narrative. And that's why, truly, they hate the alternative media, mm-hmm. and they don't like Trump, because they go counter to that narrative. And they show them the cracks, and they show them the illogical factors in it. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. They're telling a story. They're not reporting the news.
Absolutely. That's their job. As far as living in an apartment with an $8,500 a month rent and still saying he's a victim, that is a common feature of liberals, where no matter how rich they are, no matter how powerful, they can still play that victim card. Look at Hillary Clinton during the campaign. All last year, she was playing the victim, the sexist card, over and over. I'm a victim of the evil male patriarchy. And you're right. People look at that. They look at the millions and millions of dollars the Clintons have accrued over the years, and they look at how can you even think that you're a victim? But to liberals, yeah, victimhood is part of that whole persona of being a liberal. I'm victimized by somebody. I'm not responsible for my own actions. I'm not responsible for the bad things I've done. I'm being victimized by the Republicans. I'm being victimized by the men. I'm being victimized by the racists, and so forth and so on.
They're the fainting Victorians. They used to have those sofas back in the 19th century where women, when they were overwhelmed, could faint on them. And it was all an act. It was all meant to be like, oh, look at me, I'm so... And that's who these people are. They can sit there and they can...
That's exactly right. You're exactly right. Quick question. Quick question. Quick question. How old is the small person I'm hearing in the background?
She will be 1 year next month.
Oh, well, congratulations and a premature happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Yeah, every Friday we get to spend the day together, so it's one of my greatest stories in life.
All right. Well, you give her an extra hug and kiss from me, and we're going to let you go and switch over to Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, it was the comment you made about all the time off for the politicians. It's clearly we need to return back to the statesmen who definitely worked for the people, and the politicians are definitely working for the corporations. And then it reminded me of a comment a while back where Nancy Pelosi talked about Obamacare, that we'll pass the bill and then we'll read it. And it seems like they have plenty of time on their hand to actually read these bills, and they don't. And just that comment alone, we'll pass it and then we'll read it, is amazing. If they have this much time on their hands, they should be reading all these bills.
Well, they should be, and unfortunately the bills can be very, very large, and that's why they're supposed to have congressional aides to read and summarize. But what Nancy Pelosi actually said was, we have to pass it before we can read it. And it was an absurd thing to say, but she was out there saying, we actually can't tell you what's in there until after it's passed. And that is utterly absurd. And again, with the impending July 4th Independence Day holiday, you need to remember that when this country was started, only a few of the very top positions were full-time jobs, like the president and the vice president and a few other of those. Members of Congress, it was a part-time honorary position. And back then, these were people who had their own jobs, their own careers, their own businesses, and they served in the Congress. They didn't make a lot of money off of it. It was considered a civic duty and an honor to do it. And this nation was never supposed to have a permanent ruling class of hereditary leaders like the Bushes and the Clintons.
Right. So, Michael, when did the actual terminology change from statesman to politician? When did that actually happen?
Well, it's changing all the time. It all depends on whether you agree with the person or you disagree with them. If you agree with them, they're being a statesman, and if you don't agree with them, they're just being a politician.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Yeah, we're going to be spending most of Tuesday's show talking about the early history of our country, what a wonderful nation it was, what it was designed to be, and how, sadly, it has all been taken away from us. Now, James O'Keefe is out with a new video. Apparently, they got a whole bunch of these lined up, and CNN is not happy about it. Apparently, the producer of New Day, a guy by the name of Jimmy Carr, was caught on tape, first of all saying that he thinks Trump is absolutely crazy, and I can't use the specific language that he used, or the FCC is going to pull the licenses on our on-air affiliates, and then goes on to say, Jimmy Carr at CNN goes on to say, the voters are stupid as fill in the blank for having voted for Trump. In other words, the Hillaryites, the liberals, are out there solving their loss by saying, well, the only reason Hillary Clinton lost was the American voters are all stupid. No, the reason Hillary Clinton lost is because the American voters aren't as stupid as you were hoping they were going to be. But again, just hear this arrogance and disdain where CNN's people have a vastly inflated image of themselves and their place in society. But again, go back to last February when Mika Brzezinski over on MSNBC came right out and said, the job of the corporate media is to control what people think. And they actually believe it. That's what they're paid to do, and that's what they're trying to do. And that's why they're in a panic right now, because they're losing that control. And when they lose that control, those fat paychecks are going to go away. Now, Roger Stone came out with an interesting little piece of clarification, saying that Donald Trump isn't declaring war on journalism, which is what all the corporate media is saying. Donald Trump's declaring war on journalism. No, he's declaring war on bad journalism. And there is a difference, because what we're seeing with all these revelations coming on out, where yesterday the New York Times actually finally retracted that story claiming that all 17 U.S. intelligence agencies agreed Russia hacked the election. And the New York Times finally had to take it back. And when you're seeing that kind of behavior, yeah, that's bad journalism. I mean, when I took journalism in college, the idea that you put out a false or misleading story, that was considered bad journalism. And it should be attacked, because the purpose of the media is to keep the public fully informed so that they can make good choices. And, of course, that's now all been hijacked away from that to controlling what you think. And, again, we have Mika Brzezinski admitting it, actually on the air. Our job is to control what you think. So that's why the independent media is doing very well. Now, media analyst Michael William LeBron was on Russia Today comparing CNN to professional wrestling, saying it's a lot of action and it's very pretty to watch, but you all know it's ultimately all fake. And he's right. And they've been doing it all along. The difference is now the American people are skeptical. They're learning to trust their own analytical abilities to think things through and see the obvious flaws in the propaganda. They're learning how to look for the piece that should be there and isn't. And that is a very important tool to find out if you are being lied to. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the corporate media, and Nigel Farage is out there saying, now that we have CNN begging us not to call them fake news, it's clear we've hit a nerve. And yes, we have. And the reason the corporate media are in a panic is not that they have been caught in a bunch of lies recently. It's that they know in their heart of hearts they have been lying all along. And they are worried it is all going to unravel, and the American people are really going to see what the corporate media is about. And again, what Mika Brzezinski said, the job of the corporate media is to control what you think. Mind control, controlling the brain by controlling what it knows. Only giving you the information that will lead you to decide of your own free will what the government wants you to do. Oh, we have to go to war. There's no other choice. There's no other option out there. Blah, 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 blah. But it has been going all along. I want to share a couple of interesting quotes with you. Richard Salent, the former president of CBS News, and we're going back a ways, but he actually one time said, our job is to give people not what they want, but what we decide they ought to have. And very famous quote. This is from a gentleman named John Swinton. This is all the way back to 1880, which tells you how long they've been doing this. And he was giving a speech before the New York Press Club in 1880, and he basically came on out and he said, there is no such thing at this date of the world's history as an independent press. You know it, and I know it. There is not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand that it would never appear in print. I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinions out of the paper I'm connected with. Others of you are paid similar salaries for similar things. And any of you who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the streets looking for another job. If I allowed my honest opinions to appear in one issue of my paper, before 24 hours my occupation would be gone. The business of the journalist is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of mammon, and to sell the country for his daily bread. You know it, and I know it. And what folly is this toasting an independent press? We are the tools and vassals of the rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks, they pull the strings, and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. End quote. This is back in 1880. When they're admitting this. And you look back through history and you see all of these huge scandals, like the Food Lion scandal. The time that NBC rigged a truck to explode to basically harm their sales on behalf of another advertiser. There was the time that over at ABC, John Stossel, this was back in 2000, they ran a story claiming that food sold at organic and health food stores were no more safe to eat than conventional supermarkets. And of course, this was being done to help the conventional supermarkets, who even back then viewed health food stores and organic produce as a threat to their profitability. They've been doing it all along. They know it. And now they're worried the American people are beginning to realize. That's what's been going on. I look back on Edward R. Murrow, who serves as an inspiration for many of us in the independent media. And there was a wonderful movie about his life and his struggles against McCarthy called Good Luck and Good Night, which was his signature sign-off line. And they talk about a speech that he gave talking about the future of television and the necessity to maintain television as an honest reporter of current events. And there was a final quote in there that, if you haven't memorized it, you should, because it applies to the age of computers as well as to TV. This instrument can teach. It can illuminate, yes, and it can even inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box. There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And just to get you an update on this shooting at the hospital in New York, apparently there are 2 dead, one of them being the shooter himself, who is being reported took his own life. And it turns out he wasn't a fake doctor. He was a real doctor. And he was fired from the hospital. And this is, it's a what a shame that nobody in that hospital had a gun to shoot back at this guy with. That's all I can say. All righty. Now, a caller earlier in the show today mentioned this, but we're going to go through it in a little more detail. Back in 2010, the founder of Daily Cost, Marcos Moulitsas, Mulitsas. Sorry, I botched it. Mulitsas, the founder of Daily Cause, was a regular guest on MSNBC, liberal blogger, liberal network, and so he was there all the time and swapping insults about the Republicans with Keith Olbermann or whoever. Then all of a sudden in 2010, July, he found himself blacklisted. And apparently what got him kicked off MSNBC was that he mentioned on Twitter the strange, sad story of Lori Klausutis, the intern who was found dead in Joe Scarborough's office when Morning Joe was still a Republican congressman. Boy, a lot of bad things happen to those interns in Washington, D.C., don't they? Look at all the Bill Clinton interns who wound up dead under strange circumstances. Now, over at the New York Slimes, apparently the editors and reporters have gone on a walkout. And their concern, of course, is the major and ongoing staff reductions because the New York Times is losing readership, both the paper edition and their online. And I think complicating that is the fact that a lot of these corporate media outlets were caught about a month and a half ago using Chinese click bots to artificially inflate the views on their page. And I can't imagine the advertisers sitting still for that. So that's going to put further economic pressure. We know that the New York Times has actually reduced their space in their own building, and they're turning the extra floors into rental properties. So they are in trouble, and they're caught between the rock and the hard place, and now the editors and reporters are walking out and saying, you can't fire any more of us. Yeah, if the New York Times goes out of business, they sure can. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Don in Iowa, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yeah, you were talking about the press is going down the tubes. They're panicking. They don't know what's going on and everything. But Trump, what I was wondering is who's actually, is Trump in control or is somebody else in control of him? Because here's the way it looks to me. It looks like he'll get on his Twitter account sometime early in the morning or whenever he does it, and that's when he kind of cuts loose. But he doesn't have to do that. He could let the press know exactly what he thinks about him by just if they're totally fake news like CNN, he could just say you're fake news. You will not be allowed in the press room.
Well,
he
actually called him fake news during one of his speeches just yesterday, and they've already moved most of these corporate media outlets to the back of the room, which is a horrible, horrible insult. And they're all that those front rows, they belong to us. They're our hereditary right, and so forth and so on. But you know, Trump, I think, is trying to weigh just how much influence corporate media still has versus the rising independent media. And we're definitely coming to a watershed moment where there's going to be a crossover. And it's very, very close. And you can smell the panic in the corporate media offices. That the American people don't trust them anymore. The American people are very skeptical. We're not the innocent, naive people we were back during the first Cold War, where we just believed whatever the corporate media told us. I mean, it took something like 30 years. It took 30 years before we reached a point of half the American people knowing that the Warren Report on the assassination of John F. Kennedy was a fiction. But today, in the era of the independent media, the life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer, which we saw with the claims that Assad is gassing his own people. So they're in a panic. The government and the corporate media have gotten by with lies, fraud, and deception for so long, they don't really know any other way to run the government. And so having taken away their ability to lie with impunity, they're feeling they're in serious, serious trouble. And, of course, it's not their fault for having been lying in the first place. It's the fault of us American people for not listening to them anymore.
Well, it's not only the fact that they're lying and people don't believe them, but then because of that, they're also going out of business, like you're talking about. They're going bankrupt because, for one thing, people don't actually buy newspapers anymore, and fewer and fewer people all the time are actually watching TV. You know, the young kids, they don't watch TV anymore, do they?
They do more of the streaming stuff, and they get the stuff off of YouTube.
Right.
But you're right. Many of the big newspapers have already suspended their paper editions. Some magazines have done that, and they're trying to exist in the online world only. But they're still not doing well because people don't want to be lied at.
Yeah.
And
there's no reason for to turn on your computer and then New York Times is nothing anymore. What is just another website, and actually it's a hard website to deal with because they want you to register and this and that and everything, and it's all lies too.
Yeah,
so they're just competing with
they want you to actually pay for them to lie to you, and a lot of the newspapers that have tried the paywall approach, it has not worked out for them very well. Getting back to your original point, who's calling the shots in the White House? The pattern that I am seeing is that Donald Trump is being obviously intentionally distracted with the swamp trying to attack him with Russiagate and all this other nonsense talk about impeachment, although that is clearly starting to fall flat on its face. The other part of it is that I'm very concerned that Trump chose some very bad advisors. He kept too many of the holdovers from the Obama administration, and they are potentially lying to him in their briefings to him. They're giving him fake news, false information, to get him to go along with the war agenda. Nothing new there. They did the same thing to McNamara and John F. Kennedy. We have McMaster's out there saying, yeah, they're fudging the intel reports. Harry Reid was out there saying, we're just going to feed Donald Trump whatever information that will make him do what we want him to do. And I think there needs to be much more shakeup of the staff at the White House, and it may be happening because we're getting word now that it's descended to shouting matches inside the White House. And according to this article that came out of the Express in Great Britain, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson apparently lost his temper at a senior White House aide over staffing issues, meaning that it looks to me like they're trying to change the staff. They're trying to get rid of the Obama holdovers. They're trying to bring in people who are from outside the Beltway and not corrupted by this narcocracy. And they need to do it as quickly as possible. And as far as all this other thing about Russiagate and the rest of it, Trump needs to regain the initiative. He's been playing rope-a-dope for all these months. It's not working. He's got to go on the offensive. Now, he promised the American people he was going to put some of these high-level criminals in jail. The American people need to see that. Not just investigation. They can go through, we're investigating. Yeah, investigation doesn't mean anything if nobody is charged or prosecuted. James Comey illustrated that with Hillary Clinton. He went down the list of felony violations of Title 18 she committed and then said, we're not going to recommend any charges. The American people need to see some of these people actually go to jail if they're going to retain any respect at all for this central federal government.
The number one chant at all his rallies was lock her up, lock her up. That's what people wanted to see. They expected to see it. It never did happen.
We demand to see it. We demand to see it.
I would like to demand it, but who am I going to demand, I talked to my congressman here in Iowa. I went in there and told him, there's about 4 people there waiting in line in this little town to talk to him. Mm-hmm. I went in and I said, I told him about Seth Rich, and he's a pretty nice guy, but I don't think he's going to, he's just a first-year congressman. He's not going to try to make waves or anything like that.
No, first year.
As far as the Susan Rice is going to closed session. Now, okay, she wants to, but Roger Stone wants open session, and they won't let him.
I agree.
It has to be they told him it has to be closed session. That's ridiculous.
Well, the reason
he wants to be open session.
The reason they're going to all these closed sessions right now is because of the previous embarrassments where they were, all these people who were out there in the media, oh yes, there's tons of evidence that Russia was doing this, Russia doing that. Once they get them under oath, what actually comes out is there really isn't any evidence. It's just kind of a guess on our part, and it's been embarrassment after embarrassment after embarrassment. And I think that's why they're going to these closed sessions. so they can go on publicly saying one thing and have the media echo it, and what they testify to under oath is not available to contradict what they're putting on out there.
Shouldn't they let Roger Stone be in open session if he wants to? They won't even let him.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they're concerned what he's going to say.
Right, he'll call the whole thing, turn the whole thing. I mean, he'll let people know what's going on. They don't want that. So anyway, yeah, that's what I had to say, and I hope things do change because Trump, I think himself, maybe his daughter also has something to do with it too. His daughter and son-in-law are trying to. They don't want him to get killed.
Well, Jared Kushner, there does seem to be something there. Whether or not Trump knew it was going on or not, I don't know. But if you look at Jared Kushner's history, he's a guy who just has had epic failures with the businesses that he's run, and still somehow he's always able to find another bank to loan him money. So something is going on. He may be claiming he can influence the president, but again, whether Trump actually knows about this or is going to go along with it is another matter entirely. But of course, Hillary and the liberals and the Democrats, they don't care about Jared Kushner. They want to get Trump out. They want to get their war agenda moving forward. Don, we're going to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call. And, of course, adding to the problems over at the New York Times, Sarah Palin has slapped them with a defamation lawsuit, and they're talking a lot of money. And it's over this article they ran in the aftermath of the Steve Scalise shooting that implied a link with the shooting of Gabby Giffords and somehow tied Palin into it. And it's a clear case of defamation. And the New York Times lawyers have probably told management, we're going to have to settle out of court. If this goes to court, she's going to win. And so that's another reason why they're probably talking about letting more of the staff go, is they're having to prepare for this huge financial hit they're going to take. All right, we're going to go over to the war zones here. A lot of stuff going on, not being real reported. Now, a joint United Nations OPCW investigation team has concluded that the April 5th attack in Syria did use sarin. And, of course, immediately everybody is out there saying, Assad, 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 we've got to go to war with Assad. Boris Johnson is saying we have to have immediate action against Assad. The only problem is the United Nations OPCW did not apportion blame. They did not say who did it, and we know in the past it's been the rebels. Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry is saying they do not have a high degree of confidence in this report by the OPCW because it doesn't appear to be a direct investigation, but relying on information provided by a third party in the region with a known political bias against Syria. 3 guesses who that is. Now, remember, a while back was being reported over in InfoWars that these chemical attacks were being carried out in part by the White Helmets. And who has been funding the White Helmets, at least in part? George Soros. Remember, the White Helmets were there to film the aftermath of the attack. How did they know? Ever stop to think about that? So, anyway. Syrian government is advancing against ISIS. It's basically all good news. Left to themselves, Syria is going to get this matter taken care of, which is why the United States is desperate to get on in there and find a reason to stay, find a reason to escalate. And now we're getting this report that is coming out of Fars News. Terrorists in Syria plan chemical weapons provocation in Daraa province. And this is originally sourced out of Sputnik. Terrorists will blow up multiple ammunition-filled barrels with poisoning material in one of the regions in Daraa province. And the provocation will be carried out along the situation in Idlib, It's a botched English translation I'm going from here, basically saying they trust the source. And, of course, when the terrorists do this, it will be blamed on Bashar al-Assad. Now, remember what I said before about the corporate media being in trouble because people are starting to think about the stories that are being fed. And this is a perfect example of how that works. So for a moment, we're hearing about Assad gasses people, Assad gasses people, Assad gasses people. So for a moment, let's just set aside the lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons. Let's set aside the fact that the U.S. was caught trying to frame Assad for gassing his own people in 2013 and 2014 and how those hoaxes were exposed. Forget that Assad has surrendered all of his chemical weapons. That deal brokered by Russia, confirmed by both the UN and the Pentagon, and just ask yourself these questions. Why would Assad, on the verge of winning the war and gaining support from the rest of the world, use chemical weapons knowing it would open the door to the invasion the neocon war hawks want? And if Assad were dumb enough to use chemical weapons, why use them on civilians instead of the enemy? The stories, what is his motive? What does he gain? Look for what should be there and isn't. It's just more lies. And again, it's because we have a government and a corporate media that don't know any other way than to lie to get what they want. They're trapped by their own methodology, their own history. We'll be back after these few words. We've got a caller waiting on the line. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Erica. Welcome back to the show here. And before I take this next phone call, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee is on the air on Fox News right now calling on President Trump to resign or be removed under the 25th Amendment. And she's flipping back and forth between saying that he is functionally incompetent because he's not doing what she thinks he should be doing. And then going back and saying he's very unhappy with the position and 25th Amendment. I don't know if it's just a grab for media attention, but again, this is not a positive image of our government to be sending the rest of the world when you're getting ready to make war on them. If this government is going to be stupid enough to start a new world war, they better start presenting a unified front and stop all this factionalism because it's going to make us look weak. And that could lead to a potential enemy doing something very reckless and dangerous. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Mike in Alaska, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I was wondering, have you read that Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki?
No, I have not.
Okay. It's a pretty good book. It's just a basic business 101. And the reason I bring him up is he's pretty good friends with Trump. In fact, he's the only author that's co-authored anything with Trump, and they've done it, I think, 2 or 3 times. Mm-hmm. And he appeared over on InfoWars. If you go over their channel, there's a video of him being interviewed by that Miley Weaver, I think her name is, the InfoWars reporter. And there's one part in his book where he talks about being a Marine helicopter pilot in the Vietnam era, mm-hmm. and going into some sort of gold shop or someplace in North Vietnam where he inquires about the price of gold, and he thought that there would be some sort of arbitrage value given the circumstances, and he finds out that whatever the price of gold was at that time in the U.S. was the same price it was in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And I always found that to be, having been to Vietnam, I always found that story to be a bit strange because it's like, okay, you know, given the circumstances, you're just walking into Vietnamese gold shops and, it just seemed a bit strange. Well, he tells this reporter on this interview that's on their channel today that the real reason he was flying around up there in this Marine helicopter was he had been contacted by some special folks to move some special products. Mm-hmm. And I just found that to be, it hit me like a brick wall because I had read the book, it being a very good business book. I can recommend it, honestly. But thinking, okay, like when I'm in Thailand, when I'm in Vietnam, there's a lot of gold shops. They're everywhere, every corner. Asians love for weddings and and storage of value, and he's a big gold money guy. So he says, this is when I realized gold is real money.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, okay, that all makes sense, but it's a strange time to have that experience. Well, now we know why he was really dealing with gold in that part of the world.
Yeah, we do.
Crazy.
Going to have to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification. Back with hour number 2 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, there's a very interesting little story. We're hearing about all this talk about potential false flags, sarin gas. They're really hitting that sarin angle very hard. And over at stripes.com, there's an interesting article. Because apparently over at the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, which was the site of a previous scandal involving anthrax, now they're not sure but what some of their sarin gas has now gone missing. And apparently Dugway stored its sarin in a 2-container system. The sarin was in a primary container, which is then stored inside a secondary container, which is a very good precaution to take with this highly dangerous, deadly chemical. But apparently, they haven't been checking what's actually inside that primary container, and they don't actually know that the sarin is still there. They haven't checked for years. And remember, they got caught mishandling the anthrax back in 2015, and it generated a nationwide scare. So I wonder if the sarin is still there, and if not, if it's now on its way to Syria here. Now, interestingly enough, the 3-star U.S. general in command of all American forces in Syria and Iraq is saying that, in point of fact, the United States has no intention of leaving Syria when ISIS is defeated. We will have to stick around. There are going to be ISIS guerrillas to deal with, so we can't leave now. Basically what it is, their understanding is that Syria's army, Syria's military, is on the verge of kicking ISIS out of the country. And for the last few years of the 5-year effort to get rid of Assad, they have been trying to sell it to you, the American people, by saying, well, we're not really there to get rid of Assad. This is part of the war on terror. We're after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, if ISIS and Al-Qaeda are kicked out of Syria, then the U.S. doesn't have a palatable excuse to remain in that country, especially since they don't have the permission of the Syrian government. So now they're trying to hedge their bet and saying, oh, well, ISIS will never really be gone. There will be guerrillas, and we have to stay here for that. But that story's already fallen apart, because Nikki Haley was up at the United Nations just the other day going back to that agenda. Assad has to go. So they're thrashing around. And can you see how the propaganda is contradicting itself? When they first went into Syria, Assad's a tyrant, Assad's a dictator, Assad's gassing his own people. And then after all the embarrassments where it came on out that, no, it was the U.S.-backed rebels who were doing the gassing and so forth, then they switched and they said, well, we're not there to get Assad. We're there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who were being supported by the U.S. government in Syria. That's some of the stuff that came out in those released documents from Hillary Clinton's State Department, the ones that came out either through the leaks or Judicial Watch, which continues to do absolutely banner work. And it came on out. The U.S. was supplying ISIS and Al-Qaeda with weapons in Syria. They were smuggling them out of Libya, using that consulate at Benghazi as the smuggling hub. Story coming out of Iraq News, apparently yet again, American aircraft have been spotted parachuting weapons and supplies to ISIS. And the Iraq government is getting fed up with this. They're getting ready to have some high-level meetings to decide what they're going to do. And it'll be interesting to see what happens if the government of Iraq says, it's time for you all to go home. How will the United States justify staying in Iraq? Well, you still got ISIS here. We have the right to go anywhere on earth where there's a single ISIS person, whether it's Syria or Iraq or the Philippines or wherever. They're wearing that one out, though. They played that card way too many times. They burned it out here. Now, once again, Nikki Haley is up at the Security Council, only now her target is Iran. And she's out there saying that Iran has repeatedly and deliberately violated sanctions imposed by the body, and we have to take steps to respond to these violations. Forgetting, of course, that Israel actually holds the world record for ignoring or violating United Nations Security Council resolutions. Now, in point of fact, inspectors have not actually found any indications that Iran has violated the P5+1 deal. They're just looking for new excuses. Well, maybe Iran isn't doing nukes, but they're building missiles, and we think they ought to stop that. How dare they prepare to defend themselves from the coming invasion? And it is coming. It is coming. Over at Pace Magazine, they have an article saying that senior Trump allies are laying the groundwork for war with Iran. And remember, when General Wesley Clark blew the lid off this whole plan for the U.S. to conquer the oil-rich nations of the Middle East, the list ended with Iran. This has been in the works for a very, very long time. And it's not because Iran is a terrorist or a threat to their neighbors. Iran has not initiated a war of conquest with another nation in over 200 years. It is not their nature. They just want to be left alone. And certainly since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, where Iran went from good buddy of the United States to being added to the special high-interest targets list, they haven't invaded another country. Meanwhile, of course, in 2009, the U.S. went in and tried to stage yet another coup d'etat, which would have succeeded, but they made two critical mistakes. They started putting up the son of the Shah of Iran as the new ruler of the new Iran, and the new flag of the new Iran turned out to be the flag of the Shah, and at that point, all the people of Iran said, hang on a minute. And that was kind of the end of that one. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network. So Iran is all about getting rid of a country that refuses private central banking. It's about guaranteeing that Iran's oil will be traded only for the U.S. dollar. It's about breaking it up into smaller pieces that are easier to bully and push around by the United States and Israel. We're the aggressors, not Iran, not Russia, not China, not even North Korea. Although I do wish Kim Jong-un would shut his mouth sometimes. Meanwhile, over in Qatar, the diplomatic quagmire is starting to really deepen. Nobody's really sure where everybody's ultimate allegiances are going to lie on this. But there are 3 more days before the end of the Saudi ultimatum. And it doesn't look like either Qatar or Saudi Arabia are going to budge. And now the United Nations has come on in, saying that Saudi Arabia's demand to shut down Al Jazeera is an unacceptable on the right to freedom of expression and opinion. So now the UN is on Qatar's side on this one point. Very alarming article over here, and this is in Sputnik News, and I've commented on this before. Following that botched coup d'etat against Erdogan, Turkey is clearly moving away from relations with the United States and starting to pivot toward Russia. And so this article that's coming up out of Sputnik News is saying that if a regional war erupts in the Persian Gulf, the U.S. may find themselves on the side opposite of Turkey. The United States cannot rely on Turkey being an ally in a coming regional war. Turkey has become the loose cannon on deck. And in the political sense, the United States has lost control of the Middle East. And that is a dangerous, dangerous situation. They're not in control of the conflicts anymore. It's spiraling into chaos here. Germany is now basically thumbing their nose at Turkey's President Erdogan. He's headed to the G20, and he is being refused any talking time at the podium. They don't want him to say anything. Maybe they're concerned about what he's going to say. He may have found out who was behind that botched coup d'etat against him. And we mentioned this before, but again, the Israeli Air Force is targeting Syrian military positions in response to what is described as an errant projectile that landed in the Golan Heights, hitting nothing, no damage, no injuries, and Israel uncorks on the Syrian army. That, too, is a repeating pattern that we see, whether it's Syria or Gaza or wherever. Oh, my goodness, we're under attack from a bottle rocket. Send the F-16s. Now, everyone's talking about Iran's nukes, which don't exist, Iraq's nukes, which never existed, and all the rest of it, and ignoring the elephant in the room, which is Israel and its nuclear arsenal, which is estimated to have somewhere between 200 and 300 nuclear weapons. Remember, Mordecai Vanunu blew the whistle on this, actually leaked photos of the bomb factory under the Dimona reactor to the Western media. So we know Israel has nuclear weapons. Our government will never admit it because once they do, the American people are going to be demanding a refund of all that foreign aid that's gone to Israel, because it's a violation of U.S. law. The Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act. So, as you know, as part of their war reparations, Germany provided a couple of free submarines to Israel, the Dolphin class, which is a diesel-electric boat, but it is capable of launching nuclear weapons. And then Israel bought a few more, and now Germany has just okayed a deal for 3 more of these Dolphin-class vessels. And Israel is thought to possess nuclear-armed cruise missiles that can be fired from these submarines. I think it's called the Popeye. Saudi Arabia, the transition of power over there is not looking like it's going very smoothly at all. As you know, Crown Prince bin Salman shut down a TV station that was reporting on how many of the Saudi tribal chieftains are refusing to pledge allegiance to him. They're dealing with the possibility of a counter coup, as it were. And apparently Saudi Arabia is demolishing centuries-old homes in a Shiite town, basically leveling this historic district. And the destruction has sparked shout-outs in the streets between Saudi security forces and Shiite gunmen. And apparently it is fanning up the sectarian tensions. Saudi Arabia could find itself in a civil war, and that's a very awkward position to be in. Trying to deal with a civil war inside at the same time you're waging war on your neighbors is not a good plan. Now, a little bit of good news. Apparently some cooler heads have prevailed. China and Japan are holding talks to avoid any accidental clashes in the East China Sea. And they're having a 2-day consultation where they're basically going to work out protocols saying, well, you know, we're going to go here, you're going to go here. That way there isn't going to be an accident that would allow the United States to come on in and just mess everything up again. Meanwhile, the United States, which has been relying on China to try and deal with North Korea, is now imposing new sanctions on China on those businesses that have ties with North Korean businesses. And so the Trump administration, and this was a reckless, dumb thing to do because this is going to backfire on us. The Trump administration has imposed sanctions on a Chinese bank and a Chinese company and 2 Chinese citizens to try and crack down on North Korea's financing. And supposedly this is retaliation for the death of Otto Warmbier. But the reality is, and again, this gets back to the issue of face, which is far more important in the Asian cultures than it is in the United States of America. You know that Americans, by and large, don't care about face when you see some of the way the liberal snowflakes dress up in the streets. So it's a provocation, and China's going to see it as a provocation. And I understand a world war is coming, but I have to wonder at what the thinking is behind this idea of escalating the war in Syria. At the same time, you're igniting a war against Qatar. At the same time, you're looking for, to militarily attack North Korea, and apparently that's being planned. And you're annoying China at the same time. I don't think the United States can take on the whole world all at the same time. They were trying to pick it apart piecemeal. We'll get this country first, and this country first, and this country, and then this one, and then this one. And the problem is we're still stuck in all those countries. We're still stuck in Afghanistan. We're still stuck in Iraq. We're still stuck in Libya. We keep getting into these quagmires, and we cannot get out. It has turned into a war of attrition. And the United States is running out of money, materiel, manpower. And now it looks like the U.S. is trying to do regime change in the Philippines. So ISIS is all of a sudden down in the Philippines, and apparently they're leaving behind a trail of decapitated bodies behind them, civilians. So it's getting insane out there. Okay, we're going to talk about the economy a little bit. Illinois is in serious, serious, serious trouble. There are rumors they're just going to grab all the pensions to try and pay some of their bills. The comptroller of Illinois, Susana Mendoza, has basically said the state can't function any longer. They're just flat out of money. It's all locking up. They're going to be forced into bankruptcy. And Illinois is a bellwether of what's going to be happening all across this country. Remember, during the Depression of the 1930s, several states were forced to declare bankruptcy. And this economic crash is going to be far, far worse. Well, despite the manipulation of gold prices downward, somebody somewhere is thinking it is going to break out and up very soon, because Britain's only underground gold mine is planning to reopen. And they're expecting they will extract 200,000 ounces of gold. Now, there's this Scottish mining company that is basically cranking up to reopen and operate the Kaonohi mine in the village of Tindrum, starting in April of next year. Remember what I said the other day? We're talking about oil. The unit cost of extraction applies to any mined or drilled for resource. There are a lot of gold mines in the United States of America that have gold in them, but they're closed down because the cost to the mining company of recovering and processing and refining an ounce of gold from their mines is actually more than that ounce of gold is worth at current prices. When gold prices go back up, those mines will reopen. We're going to take a phone call here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm just a couple of things, but I'm just wondering, where do you think you're going to get the manpower to fight all these wars?
They're going to have
people aren't running to join the military anymore.
No, they're going to have a draft.
If they put a draft, well, are they that crazy to think that? First of all, 18-year-olds vote now, unlike during the beginning of Vietnam and most of the Vietnam War. Second of all, they think they got problems now in the streets. Could you just imagine if they dare to do something like this? If people in mass would refuse to go.
They're cornered. They're cornered. From their point of view, they don't have a choice anymore. As you said, people are not signing up for the military in enough numbers. I know they're going on out and recruiting among the illegal immigrants, but that's not going to be an effective, committed fighting force. They're signing.
No, they'd fall apart in a minute. Yeah,
they would. And after the war is all over, we can collect up all their guns and sell them on the surplus market under the slogan, never fired, only dropped once.
And I'm not even talking about going to war with Russia. I'm not even including that. It's possible that Putin might just say, you know what? You imbeciles are so stupid, you want to go and get yourself involved all over the place? You know what? We'll just step aside and let you go and do it. He probably supports him. He'd probably get weapons and he says, go ahead, start your war with Iran, stay in Afghanistan.
Putin already said that. Putin already said that a few years ago, that if the U.S. embarks on this, they'll turn it into a war of attrition and wear them down like Vietnam. Stay on the line, Mark. I'm going to come right back to you. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking with Mark in North Carolina. And again, we're talking about how several years ago, Putin said if the U.S. starts to go into the Middle East, if they start invading all these countries, Russia's strategy was to turn it into a war of attrition and just wear the United States down, as happened in Vietnam. And that's exactly where we are right now. One of the big failures of our military policy is assuming that the enemy is going to fight the wars the way the United States is prepared to fight them. And some countries fell into that trap, and they paid a price for it. Putin's too smart for that. He's going to be thinking outside the box. He's going to be thinking unconventional. He's not going to get into a war with the United States and fight the war the United States is already prepared to fight and win. And hopefully somebody...
I don't even know if we're prepared. Well, I'm saying I don't even know if we're prepared to win that fight. As far as
I don't think we can.
About the Russian military, I think they'd kick our butts, and those aircraft carriers that we have there would be basically sitting ducks. They're dinosaurs. That's all they are. I was talking to my son about that earlier, who just got out of the Air Force a couple of years ago. Yeah, he went in after 9/11. Fortunately, he didn't stay in. So we were just talking about that, about those aircraft carriers. They'd be sitting ducks, but. Like you said, I don't think, but Putin probably won't. He probably is going to, he's both a chess player and a judo artist. And he knows how to use the enemy's strengths as their and make them into their weaknesses. And the only thing is, I don't know how he's going to get out of it, because he has made commitments to Iran and to Syria. So, to protect both of those countries.
I think he will honor them. Because, again, the Russians remember World War II and just how close the Nazis got to Moscow. And I think Putin's attitude is going to be that if he's going to have to fight the United States of America, he'd rather do it as far away from their own soil as possible. But that being said, you're right about the aircraft carriers being a dinosaur, even setting aside the boondoggle that the Gerald R. Ford is obviously turning out to be. The reality is both Russia and China have developed missiles that are specifically designed to identify and go after aircraft carriers in the middle of their screening ships. They're going to ignore the outer screening ships. They're incredibly fast. They're maneuverable. They're not following a predictable track or path of any kind, which means phalanx can't engage them. There was a story that came out about 2 years ago, I think, where apparently there was a meeting where the Joint Chiefs called in one of their naval warfare experts and asked point blank, if we go to war with Russia or China, what is the life expectancy of the aircraft carriers? And this Navy expert said probably about 1 week, 2 weeks if you keep them in port. And as I've mentioned before, there's a lot of inertia in U.S. military planning. When we went into World War II, the prevailing opinion within the Navy was that the main battleship was going to carry the brunt of the war, like the Aiea class battleships, like the one that we have down here in the harbor. And the aircraft carrier was kind of a nice to have over on the side, but will never really play a significant role. Then, of course, Pearl Harbor was the wake-up call on that one. And the United States embarked on a program. They literally built over 100 aircraft carriers before the war was finished. Most of them have now been scrapped, and we now have the supercarrier fleet, but we don't have that many of them. And they are targets of weapons specifically designed to hunt them down and kill them.
Yeah, so I really don't know what they're planning, and but like I said, if we're planning on going and invading all these countries, it's going to, take a heck of a lot more soldiers, and you're going to have motivated soldiers. I think they're picking from the bottom of the barrel now. I think what you saw at that in Japan there with that collision,
yes.
I think you're seeing a sign that even the officers aren't as good as they were at one time. They are really picking from the bottom of the barrel. If they can't avoid a container ship, how are they going to avoid missiles?
Well, somebody ignored the right-of-way rules of ocean traffic, tried to get around the front of the cargo ship, and they misjudged it. It was a major goof, and now they're trying to say, oh, the cargo ship was attacking us. That's ridiculous. All right, listen, Mark, we're going to let you go. Take a break for commercials. Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And to get an update on this Bronx Hospital shooting, Mayor de Blasio is saying it's not an act of terror. Apparently it was a revenge killing. The shooter was a doctor who'd been fired from the hospital. Oddly enough, Reuters is reporting that this guy used an M16 assault rifle. Now, maybe it's just that reporters, especially liberal reporters who are anti-gun, are too dumb to know the difference between an M16 and an AR-15. They look very, very similar. They're based on the same frame. But if this guy really did have an M16, you have to ask, where did he get it? Because M16s can go full auto. They're not very common in society. I mean, under our gun laws, if you're willing to pay the tax for it, you can own a full automatic weapon. Out in Hollywood, where you have these companies that do nothing but rent guns for films and TV shows, most of the weapons are fake, they're disabled, but they do keep some working weapons available in case they need to be used. And they have to pay a huge tax to get the full automatic weapon. But again, maybe somebody just doesn't know the difference between an M16 and an AR-15. And if it is an AR-15, the gun grabber is going to say, oh, see, we have to ban the AR-15. No, we should have armed the rest of the hospital staff, because then he probably wouldn't have walked in there in the first place. I'll bet you that hospital is a gun-free zone. All right, we're going to go back to the telephones here. Sherry in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Thank you. Listen, you said something about predatory lending.
Yes.
That really shocked me. I didn't know this. 2%, now the optimum word here is compound. You used as an example, 2% compound interest on a loan can be compounded at that rate, or whatever it is, 2, 3%, whatever, on the loan as often as the bank people feel like compounding it during that current year.
Well,
this is, and this fact was hidden from the borrowers.
No, it's not.
In other words, you have a. Okay.
No, it's not hidden from the borrowers. Okay, the rate of compounding has to be part of the original loan agreement. That is the letter of the law. The problem is most people don't understand what a terrible impact the compounding frequency has on the final debt. And most people are always saying, I need a lower interest rate, I need a lower interest rate, and the lender will say, we can give you a lower interest rate, but we're going to increase the compounding frequency. And most people don't understand. Both of those factors are important, and you need to get them both as low as possible, or you are going to get reamed.
Okay, so if someone wanted to have a I'm not interested, but I know that a lot of people are going to be interested, because I really think that the banks are going to default in the next downfall. But so the question would be then, can a borrower on a loan that has compound interest, can they ask how often during the year then that annual rate will be applied?
Well, again, the frequency of the compounding has to be part of the original loan agreement. The part that you may not be under control is if you have agreed to a variable rate mortgage or a variable rate credit card that is based on the prime rate from the Federal Reserve. Then when the Federal Reserve increases the rate, which it just did recently, your interest rates go up on those credit cards and that mortgage or car loan or whatever. And that's why they'll offer the lower initial interest rate on the variable rate loans, because they figure they're going to get it on the back end anyway. And they do charge more for a fixed rate on loans, because then if the rates go up and their cost of borrowing goes up, they can't recover it from you.
Okay. And also, I remember telling a friend, and I hope this is in 2008, if they offer a refinance, that can add all kinds of money to a loan, can't it?
Yes, it can.
Refinance, and so you're really set back.
Ultimately, yes. The whole point of a refinancing is to lower your monthly payments if, in fact, you've been forced to take a lower-paying job, which so many have, and the bank will come in and say, we don't want to foreclose, we don't want to do any of that stuff. We will offer you a refinancing to stretch the payments out much longer, but then, of course, they're accruing interest over a much longer period of time, and that interest cost will be that much higher.
Right. Do I have time for a quick liberal view?
You do, but before that, I just want to comment. You know, in the good old days when you'd open a savings account at a bank, they'd give you a toaster or something. Banks don't give anything away these days at all. Maybe a calendar, which is silly because nobody uses paper calendars anymore.
I do.
Okay. You wanted to offer what do you call it, liberal view?
Yeah, well, I was just saying, you know, you're talking about there will always be people who desire to be dependent on some others. There's always those in the world. It takes all kinds to make a world. But the Trump supporters who are, I would say by and large, well, by far, are independent, lovers of independence. They want to forge their own future. They don't want restrictions on everything unless it's in there to protect them. But you know, I always keep in mind that Trump supporters are Coliseum strong. He filled those Coliseums.
Yes.
And the other guys are high school classroom and gymnasium strong. And that's just, to me, says it all.
You know, plus, of course, all those liberals, hardly any of them know how to use a gun.
Yeah.
And they get a splinter and they break down in tears. Again, like the illegal immigrants the Army's recruiting, it's not going to be an effective, committed fighting force.
Yeah, right. I know.
Yes. You,
well,
Sergeant, I have a blister. You know.
Yeah, I know. Well, you know, aside from that emotional part of it, I really think there's just most people just want to leave their own lives, and that's all. They don't want someone to offer them a job that's at one place, factory here, house there, self-driving cars. There are people that like that. In fact, even in Russia today, there's some people that like the old communist system that used to be, because they just want someone to come in and just say, here's where you work, here's your little apartment, and never mind that it's, you know, 40 stories up and it's cramped and you have to have every 3 generations crammed in there, whatever. They don't care. They just want to be cared for, because being out on the street's rough, you know.
Well, you know,
there's that percentage.
Freedom, as it used to be in the United States, freedom meant the freedom to succeed and also the freedom to fail, and the responsibility of accepting either outcome, because that's what a business gamble is. Now, the idea of the government telling you what job you're going to do, I think there's a very good illustration of that that was in the book Gorky Park, and they made a movie of the first of the books. It's actually a whole series about this American sable smuggler and Gorky Park in Moscow, and it's all very political. In the second book, the hero of the first book, who solves the crime because he angered politicians who were profiting off of this American businessman, he's been assigned a job on a Russian fishing ship, cleaning fish for the freezers, and that's obviously going to be the downside, where the government decides what job you're going to have. If you annoy somebody, you're going to get a really rotten job. And we're actually starting to get kind of close to that mindset already, because apparently over at Facebook there's a major problem there. Where you can literally block somebody's account by simply flagging it and saying, I don't like this, and Facebook will automatically shut their account down for a punitive period of time. I think it's 60 days. And they don't verify that the complaint is legit. And somebody just did it to my 2 accounts. I can't use my Facebook page, and I don't know when it happened because I don't actually use Facebook all that much anymore. But we're getting into that, where everything is overwhelmed by political considerations rather than expedience and what's going to work. When the United States was started, politics was supposed to be just a minor part of our activity, and now it dominates everything. And that was exactly the same thing they had in the Soviet Union. Nobody would even go to the bathroom without considering the political ramifications of what I'm about to do.
Yeah, it's like prison. Yeah, well, the downfall of the banks will probably grab as much money as they can to satisfy whatever bank loans that are outstanding. So, you gave me a clearer picture of this, but I would, I tell you, I like a challenge in my life. I don't like things to be too easy. I'm not going to make things difficult for myself, but I can think of a lot of things I'd like to. I won't go into it, but
yeah.
I would just want to get that dadgum thing paid off and feel free again. That I don't care if I have to move into a little mobile home or one of these little tiny Airstream or something that's good, but just anything to know I'm free. It would be. But see, different people are different, but there's more of us, the Coliseum strong ones, the Trump supporters. We want our freedom. And I can understand how the others feel, though, because, I hate to admit it, but I am from California. And,
well, I hate to admit it, but I lived in California for a while here. Here's basically the situation. Our entire system is designed to get the population into debt and to keep them in debt in order to maximize profits to that Federal Reserve. That's why we're seeing this whole thing with college student loans. College is now being sold as a fashion accessory. You've got to have a college degree, even though most of them are actually worthless. The scholarship and financial support has been shut down, forcing students to go into debt to get their college education. And I was very lucky in that when I went to college, I didn't need to take out a student loan because I was working as a professional magician, and I could work evenings and weekends and go to school during the weekdays, and that's how I paid for my college education, which turned out to be completely worthless to me later in life, I might add. Right now, the best thing anybody can do is get as much out of debt as you can before the big crash comes. And I know the system is rigged against you. They don't want the debt slaves to break free. And any way that they can force you deeper into debt, they're going to do it. And one way that they are doing it is with this ridiculous Obamacare with sky-high health insurance premiums and then sky-high deductibles, so that a lot of people, even if they have the insurance, they get a medical emergency, they can be put right on the edge of bankruptcy with what's left over after the deductible. It is designed to entrap and enslave free people. That's its purpose, okay?
Yeah, that's right. I agree.
All right. I got to let you go, Sherry. I've given you a big chunk of time, and we got 2 callers I want to give some time to because we're coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. So, Sherry, thank you very much, and we're going to switch to Jim in Ohio. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. I just wondered if you'd ever thought of the scenario that all this war drum beating that's going on, it gets publicized so much. What if all the agreements are made behind closed doors and all of this rhetoric is just public posturing to make the people be very afraid of all of these national threats when they're really all working together behind the scenes? I mean, look at the Russians. We worked with them on a space station for how many years? We've given them foreign aid for how many decades to prop up their communist regimes before the fall of communism, supposedly. How do we know any of this stuff is real?
Well, hang on. I think your view of history is slightly fuzzy here. The United States wasn't giving the Soviet Union much in the way of foreign aid. It was a token amount, basically trying to keep things calm down there. We did agree to sell them a huge amount of grain when they were faced with famine following that disastrous experiment with Lysenkoism. But when the Soviet Union collapsed and the new Russian republics emerged, that's when we began the space cooperation. And yes, we did have the Apollo-Soyuz flight where they were trying to diffuse the Cold War tensions. But most of our space cooperation happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's why we're in this embarrassing situation right now where Russia knows how to make really good rocket engines and the U.S. is having to rediscover how to build that. because many companies in the United States are still having to import Russian-built rocket engines. Now, we were all friends and all buddy-buddy up until Putin took direct control of Russia's central bank, and then Russia went back onto that special high-interest targets list. So we know there's a lot of back-channel discussion going on, but I think the threat of a war is very, very real, and all this talk about threats to us is the sales pitch, because we're not under threat. Nobody's threatening us. It's the U.S. that's attacking and invading all these other countries. Anyway, Jim, we're coming up here on the top of the hour, and I'm going to let you go, and we're going to take another phone call from Ralph in California. Ralph, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. Real quick, I heard, we're going to have manufacturing jobs coming back here, but the problem is there's going to be a lot of it's going to be automated. So which brings to the point where we're going to start bringing in this universal pay. And what are your comments on that? Because it sounds kind of scary in the future to come regarding that.
Well, here, I have two concerns, both of which I've expressed before. If we have factories full of robots and shopping malls full of robots, there are going to be no customers. If human workers do not have jobs and are not able to spend money, then it's all going to lock up. Before the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud meltdown, consumer spending was 60% of the United States economy, and that is rapidly vanishing. The retail Mageddon is proceeding. Now, this idea of just giving people money, which smacks to me of outright socialism, it sounds like a good idea, and I'm sure the liberals are saying, oh, yes, we'd love to have free money every month. The problem is, where are they going to get it from? Who's going to pay to give 100 million people who are not working a basic universal income? It sounds like a new form of welfare, and under our current fascistic system, I don't see the ultra-wealthy being all that hot on signing the checks to pay for it all. Socialism or liberalism, it works fine until you run out of other people's money. And that's the eventual problem. What we need to do is go back to a system where the American people are incentivized to work hard. And that is done by allowing them to keep a much larger portion of the benefits of their work. What has demoralized and dispirited the American people at this point is this idea that no matter how hard you work, you'll be allowed to keep just enough to stay alive, and the banks and the politicians and Israel and the military-industrial complex get all the rest. And that, of course, has taken the wind out of the sails of America's workforce. Nobody has any hope that their life is going to get any better. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Ralph, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the economy here, and as you know, there is a big debate going on. It's not getting a lot of coverage regarding Social Security, because Social Security is running out of money. And the primary reason that they are is back during the presidency of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton basically started borrowing money from the Social Security Trust Fund. Now, before he became president, they had increased Social Security taxes in order to build up a cash surplus in advance of the surge in retirements expected from the baby boomer generation, of which I am one. And Bill Clinton saw all that money just sitting there, and he moved it over to the general ledger and spent it as general revenues, and that's where he got his miraculous federal budget surplus. And what is in the Social Security Trust Fund now is a special issuing of Treasury bonds, which the government cannot make good on. So now they're kind of stuck and saying, how are we going to do this? We can't make good. We're defaulting on the American people right now. So apparently out in Wyoming, Senator Alan Simpson, Republican, is out there saying, it's all our fault. He's saying the senior citizens, they're the greediest generation. They're just demanding all these benefits. Wrong. Senator Simpson needs to be reminded Social Security is not a benefit. It's our money that we paid into the system over the years. It doesn't belong to the government. the government doesn't really have its own money. Everything it spends is taken from the American people. And if you take money from the American people and you say somewhere down the road we will be providing you with retirement benefits, that's what's supposed to happen. Social Security originally was about taking the Social Security payments, investing the money, building a profit so that there would be a comfortable retirement. Unfortunately, almost as soon as it began, Congress began using that Social Security money for pork barrel projects that didn't generate a financial return, and in many cases flat out lost money. Then you had Bill Clinton dipping into that cash surplus, and that's why they're in trouble right now. And they're out there trying to say, well, it's all your fault. You're living too long. You're demanding too much. No, we're demanding what you agreed you were going to give us. And over in the private sector, another article out of Goldcore, there is a pensions time bomb in America, and it will be a crisis. Because, again, it's not just Social Security that's being hit by the baby boomer retirements. And the pensions are in major trouble for a couple of reasons. One is that state-run pensions, like the ones in Illinois, may be forced to be liquidated to deal with the state's financial collapse. But a big problem in all the pensions all across America goes all the way back to the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud meltdown. All right, we're going to do station identification here. When we come on back, we're going to have the lovely Lady Claire. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3 on this Pauhana Friday. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us on Friday in our 3rd hour, and she will also be sharing the microphone for at least part of the day next Tuesday, Independence Day. So what is the first thing you want to talk about? Well, this is something... Whoop, I'm sorry, my bad.
There we go.
Help if I turn up her volume.
Probably. Thank you, dear.
Sure, do it the easy way.
Right. There has been a kerfluffle between China and India. China has warned India to stop, quote-unquote, clamoring for war, and has reminded them of the thrashing they received from the People's Liberation Army in '62. The Indian Army has opened a new helicopter base or bases in Sikkim, and that's where the tensions are riding.
Well,
right?
There's a difference between 1962 and now, and that is that India has nuclear weapons.
Yes, I was going to get to that. All I can say is, Sergei Lavrov, white courtesy telephone, please. Because if there's anyone on this planet who might be able to, calm that down, it would be either himself or Putin.
I was looking at this area in Google Earth the other day, and frankly, I can't see anything that's worth fighting over. But
well, it's different if you're there on the ground.
Okay.
Yeah. And this came from Sputnik. Is the U.S. really ready for unprecedented actions in Syria? And there was a political analyst by the name of Alexander Gusev. He's the director of the Institute for Strategic Planning, and he made Sputnik Radio aware that the U.S. broadcaster talking about military action in Syria, a.k.a. CNN, Clinton News Network, has kind of played fast and loose with the truth more than one time. And this guy pointed out that CNN reported on the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush, along with 2 destroyers and 2 cruisers, are being deployed in the eastern Mediterranean for routine patrols. Now, he mentioned that the destroyers and cruisers could fire Tomahawk missiles without putting pilots in manned aircraft at risk. And in addition, there are dozens of aircraft already in the Middle East for operations against, allegedly, ISIS, Daesh, in Syria and Iraq that could be used in a potential strike against Syria. Mike, everything I am seeing is pointing to a regional war between the U.S., Russia, Syria, and Iran.
Well, we know that the ultimate goal of these wars included Iran and Russia and China, and they just seem to be moving forward with this as rapidly as they can, because public opposition to the wars is rapidly building, not just in the United States, but around the world, rather. And So it feels to me like they're just putting pedal to the metal and hitting overdrive on this thing. And as I said earlier in the show, it's one thing for the United States to try and conquer the world one nation at a time, even though those have all turned into quagmires. But now it looks like the U.S. is getting ready to escalate in Syria, start something in Qatar, go into North Korea. I seriously doubt the United States can literally go to war with the rest of the entire planet at this point.
Yeah. And we had another episode of an Israeli unmanned aerial vehicle targeting Syrian army positions in the Golan Heights after a projectile allegedly fired from Syria landed in the occupied territory. The Lebanon-based Arabic-language Al-Manar television network reported today that the drone struck a Syrian battle tank as well as a 105-millimeter cannon. How large is that, Mike?
It's a big
Significant?
cannon. It's a big cannon.
Yeah, you know. And this is the fourth time this week that projectiles from Syria have allegedly hit the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. You know, and the problem for Syria is they can't strike back. Because if they do, that's going to be the justification for Israel just going on in there and hauling off with all the firepower they have.
Well, I think when Israel decides they're going to do it anyway. And again, I'm very concerned about this immediate coming weekend and the 4th of July itself. Because when Israel's going to do something really icky, they'll wait for something that distracts the American people so that the American people don't start screaming at our government, let's stop giving Israel all these weapons they're doing bad things with.
And we had a very interesting characterization of the fight coming in Raqqa. The general characterized U.S. troops as just getting started good in Raqqa.
Ooh, good English has went.
Yeah, U.S. Commander Lieutenant Stephen Townsend today told CBS News that he believes that there are only about 25 to 30% of the military campaign for the ISIS capital, which has happened so far, talking up a massive U.S. military buildup in the area and insisting that U.S. troops are just getting started good in the city's invasion.
This is a lieutenant general?
Ouch. Ouch.
I mean, a corporal, maybe.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to do a quick little shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining our network. And we're actually going to go ahead and take a phone call from Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hello, Mike and Claire.
Aloha.
Listen, Mike, I just have a quick comment, and I just want you to answer. A few weeks ago, you mentioned how the Founding Fathers were businessmen and knew how to run the country. You remind me of a funny story when FDR appointed Joe Kennedy Sr. as the Secretary of the SEC, and he stated that it takes a crook to catch these crooks.
Yes.
Now, my opinion, my question is, did he really say that, or were it was mentioned by his enemies or a reporter?
You know, I've heard the quote. I don't have confirmation it came from FDR, but it very easily could have. Again, we have to be very distrustful of everything that we read in the history books because it's just as distorted as what we're seeing on CNN and Fox News and everything else today. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank
you, Mike.
We're going to let you go. So back to you now.
Okay. Now, all of what is going on with the U.S. military in Syria is happening without the permission of the Syrian government. But Townsend downplayed the risk of clashes with Syria or Russia, saying he believes, this is a big assumption, they're comfortable with focusing on the rest of the country while the U.S. invades Raqqa, and that he doesn't anticipate any conflicts. Is this gentleman barking dog mad, Michael?
No, he's not. He's not mad. He's trying to put out the propaganda to keep everybody in the United States calm. There is a growing opposition to all of these wars, and we may not be demonstrating in the streets because we've come to understand demonstrating in the streets will not accomplish anything. But I don't think that we should confuse silence for consent.
No.
Because certainly as we talk to people around this island, and there's a lot of concern here about a potential nuclear war with Russia and China because we're a big target.
Yeah.
And I think the concern here is that the American people are reaching their threshold of simply saying no more of this.
Yeah.
And the United States is still trying to maintain the illusion that somehow this intervention into Syria is necessary, it is moral, it is just, and the idea that Assad is this evil guy who's gassing his own people, that one has been discredited so many times. It's almost embarrassing that they're coming back to that line, trying it yet again.
They're trotting it out yet again.
It's like they think we don't remember anything that happened before last week, and that, of course, is no longer true in the age of the Internet.
Mm-hmm.
The Internet has given society a collective memory that is not subject to editing and control by the government, at least not yet. But they're trying to say, yeah, we're there to fight the terrorists, and yet at the same time you've got Nikki Haley at the United Nations going back to the agenda, Assad must go, and you have the commander of the U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq saying, well, even after the terrorists are gone, we plan on staying.
Yeah, that's more than a little scary. And I've got to tell you, Mike, if this guy's thought processes are as sloppy as is his English, we are in deep trouble in this very immoral and illegal invasion of Syria. And I think, unfortunately, it's only a question of time before there is a military clash between U.S., Syrian, and Russian forces. Russia has warned us that any attack on any Syrian-Russian aircraft by the U.S. military will bring a proportional response.
I thought that warning was basically a blanket warning for any military invasion of Iran. It's not confined to the aircraft.
Ah, okay. All right. Then I stand corrected.
Okay.
Very interesting thing came out of the Washington Compost recently. After U.S.-backed bombing sparks famine in Yemen, U.S. media insists U.S. is not the problem.
We're never the problem.
We're
the good guys.
A guy by the name of Jackson Deal took a massive human rights violating catastrophe, the U.S.-assisted Saudi bombing of Yemen for the past 2.5 years, and the massive famine it's caused, and somehow turned it into a write-up on how good and noble the United States is. Just when you think you can't get into it any heavier and deeper, someone does. Well,
truth is the first casualty of war. And again, the propaganda to convince the American people to go along with this is that these wars are all necessary, that they're moral, just, that we're saving the world for democracy, whatever else are going to go on out there. When the American people finally wake up and realize we're the bad guys in this conflict, it's going to be much harder to move things forward. And there's actually a part of me that thinks reinstitution of the draft might actually be a good thing, because that will be a wake-up call, especially for those from the Vietnam age who will remember that a lot of our kids got killed and crippled just to make the defense contractors rich.
It's going to be their grandkids who are going to wind up getting drafted.
Absolutely.
And, I look at what this guy said, and I have to think, whatever his handlers are paying him to regurgitate their codswallop about the U.S.'s high moral ground in Yemen cannot possibly be enough to continue wading into the filthy depth of hypocrisy and deceit as deeply as he has to create such an article.
I'm sure he's going to get a raise.
Probably.
That's the annoying and frustrating thing. All these people who are lying to you, they're being paid huge amounts of money for it.
Yeah.
That's just annoying.
And let's go back to the facts of the case in Yemen. The U.S.-enabled Saudi war on Yemen is causing the deaths and maimings for life of Yemen's children. Because the Saudis have blockaded Yemeni ports so no food can get in, Yemeni children are now dying from complications of malnutrition. Fact, the malnutrition in Yemen has brought cholera in its wake, one of the most severe epidemics the world has ever seen in the 21st century.
Which is why I'm not sure it's a natural occurring epidemic.
You think it may have been weaponized?
It may have been a biological weapon attack.
Wow. Okay.
We're dealing with a U.S. government that is already in violation of international law repeatedly, use of torture, use of white phosphorus over residential areas. Do you think they're going to stop at trying to basically kill off the people of Yemen? And remember, this war was not Saudi Arabia's idea. The U.S. is using Saudi Arabia as a proxy because of the growing opposition to more U.S. wars. Because several years ago there was what was called a successful intervention in Yemen, where the democratically elected government was ousted in a coup d'etat, and a junta, a puppet government, was put on into Yemen. But the people of Yemen didn't want a puppet ruler. They wanted their own country back, and they're trying to kick that puppet ruler out. And they've all but succeeded, and that's when all of a sudden the United States goes to Saudi Arabia and says, we will give you all kinds of really nice things if you'll go in and slap those Yemeni people down under the principle that once you are a conquered province of the American empire, you stay there.
Yeah. And other fact, the Saudis are using depleted uranium in Yemen. And the use of depleted uranium weapons is having precisely the same effect on children here as it did in Fallujah or with our surface people and their kids, and Iraq, with birth deformities, stillbirths, and cancers just absolutely soaring. And, you know, in looking what Deal did, in my mind, it's very much akin to a doctor's touching up a patient's x-ray to assure them that their cancer isn't really that bad at all. And the cancer is participating in an immoral, illegal war where the U.S. government and its Saudi counterparts are committing war crimes in the name of bringing back a U.S.-sponsored puppet the Yemeni people don't want ruling them.
Well, it's more than that. It's maintaining this idea that, you know, we're the good guys. We have a manifest destiny to bring our civilization to the rest of the world, which is really kind of dumb when you take a look around at what our civilization has decayed into at this point. And the other part of the propaganda, of course, is these other nations deserve to be invaded, and what's happening to the civilians who are living there, well, you know, they're godless non-believers anyway, and they deserve what happens to them. It's the same propaganda you get in every single war. You dehumanize the enemy, you give them a slang, negative name, you strip their humanity from them in the public eye, and then you can pretty much do whatever you want with them. Again, an obsolete concept, but that's what's going on.
Yeah. Also, it looks as though the U.S. might be getting ready at some point soon for regime change in Iran.
Well, they've been trying for that for years.
Yeah.
They tried it back in 2009, remember?
Yeah, I know. So after 15 years of unsuccessful war in Afghanistan and Iraq, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says the Trump administration is pursuing a policy of regime change in Iran, which might lead to a third ground war in the Middle East since 2001. What is this man thinking? And, of course, with Iran, there is, draped over the Bösendorfer Baby Grand, the 6,000-pound gorilla, and it's snoozing for the moment here. That 6,000-pound gorilla is Russia, which has promised through the last decades to come to Iran's aid militarily should it be attacked. So war with Russia over Syria and Iran, the thought of this is nothing that I can conceive. It is sheer, absolute, foaming at the mouth, dog-mad insanity. And yet that appears to be exactly the direction in which the U.S. government is headed here.
Well, it seems mad until you remember that the ultimate goal of all of these wars is to drag the world back to Bretton Woods, where the entire world is forced to use the U.S. dollar for all cross-border trade and banking, off of which the U.S. financial center makes a huge profit. The Federal Reserve makes a huge profit.
Right.
And ultimately, in order for that to work, the ruble and the yuan must be destroyed. And the only way you're going to destroy the ruble is to destroy Russia, and the only way you're going to destroy the yuan is to destroy China. And I hearken back to that article by Paul Craig Roberts, who basically came on out and said that his sources are saying there's a serious discussion going on in Washington, D.C. about not even risking losing in a conventional war against Russia and just launching an unprovoked nuclear strike at them, so devastating they'll be too scared to strike back. And that's a dangerous, dangerous gamble.
Yeah. And, Mike, to me this is reckless in the extreme, and I say that because at this point in the U.S. military's preparedness, it doesn't have the weaponry, the troop strength, the money, or the manufacturing to ensure a positive outcome to a conventional war with Russia. So the timing is just, it's completely completely insane.
I keep thinking back to that stupid cruise missile attack on the Syrian airbase by Trump, and it was a major embarrassment because most of those missiles didn't even hit the airfield, and those that did hit the airfield didn't hit anything important.
Yeah, and Russia has been making incredible strides recently in its weapons capabilities. They're showing it at aero shows all over the place.
And people are buying this stuff.
Yeah, they're flocking to it.
They're seeing the poor performance of America's weapons, the very superior performance and lower cost of these Russian and Chinese weapons, and other countries, international buyers that are not under some kind of political or treaty constraint are starting to arm up using these Russian and Chinese weapons.
Mm-hmm. And what technology is getting foisted off on our American military? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Lockheed Martin's F-35. Well, it's been grounded over oxygen problems, flight tests delayed until at least 2018. It's being characterized as a $1.4 trillion national disaster. The question is being asked, is the F-35 a $1 trillion mistake? And it's being characterized as a fighter that won't have a real chance in combat.
Well, they're making the same mistake with that they made with the F-4 Phantom. It's an overemphasis on its active defenses and its missile systems. We're going to take a break for commercials. We're going to come on back and bash the F-35 a little more after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the F-35. It is a boondoggle extraordinaire, and in many ways, they've made the same mistake with this plane that they made with the original version of the Phantom F-4, in which the doctrine was the missiles and electronics are going to do all the fighting, and the pilot and the F-4 is just going to sort of hang back. And it really didn't work out. The missiles didn't work all that well. Ultimately, I mean, they actually built that first Phantom F-4 without an air-to-air cannon. That's how overly confident they were that all these missiles were going to work. And the missiles always worked wonderfully in testing, and then when they actually got out there in combat, it didn't work well at all. And the U.S. Navy's kill ratio fell to 3-to-1. Which is still good, but not as good as it had been before the war, where it was 12-to-1. So they ultimately literally added a belly pod with a gun to the F-4, which made it heavier and less maneuverable. And believe it or not, they've actually had to do that to the F-35. Not because they didn't put a cannon in the F-35. They did, but the software for it is not going to be ready until maybe 2019, and in test firings, the gun actually can cause harm to the port side wing root where it is. So now they've bolted. And that's another problem. Under cost-plus military building, they just add things and drive the price up. And so it is overweight, underpowered, has a bad habit of the engines exploding. It can be defeated in air-to-air combat by 1970s vintage jet fighters.
Wow, that's bad.
And so, again, it's a repeat of Vietnam. If the enemy gets past the electronics and the missiles, the F-35 is going to be eaten for lunch. And things are so bad on the F-35, they're not going to cancel it. Projects this large have a political life of their own. Too many people are making money off of it, but it may never be usable. And Congress is actually seriously considering reactivating production on the F-22. To bring that back, even though the F-22 has its own laundry list of problems, including an inability to fly at its design altitude because of problems with the pilot's breathing. And now it turns out the F-35 also has a problem with delivering oxygen to the pilots. And I don't know, did all the good engineers already leave to other countries where manufacturing is still respected? But you look at all the problems with our recent weapons. And again, it's politics. It's all about profit. And a lot of these weapons systems were initially put together with the expectation they'd never actually be used. And that was a big part of the scam during the original Cold War, where they were taking all this money away from the American people, and they were building all these different weapons and airplanes, and they were having fun out at Edwards with all these very exotic aircraft like the Goblin and so forth. And the idea was it didn't really matter if it worked all that well because the expectation was it would never really be used. Well, now we're in a situation where we've got a government that is apparently taking us to war against multiple countries, and we're going in there from a position of tremendous weakness economically, and all of these weapon systems that have all these problems. The only thing that we have that is a credible threat right now is the nuclear arsenal, which gets us back to Paul Craig Roberts and his warning that they're actually talking about just hauling off and having a nuclear strike against Russia rather than risk defeat in a conventional war. So it is a very, very scary situation, and I don't understand what's going on. Is there lead in the water in Washington, D.C., like there is in Flint? They're all juiced out of their mind on prescription antidepressants because, frankly, it does, I agree with you, they sound like they're borderline insane.
Yeah.
And I understand their rationale. We must have war with Russia and China or the United States is finished, but it is an amazing, they're gambling with billions of lives in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're going to use for the next 100 years. And you want to talk about insanity, that is it right there.
And what is there anything that can be done to change the corporate culture of weapons manufacturing at this point?
We need another Harry Truman. Because going into World War II, he saw this was a problem.
Yeah.
And we've got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to Claire's talking points here, I'm looking at the Fox News feed during the commercial, and they're out there saying, oh, the militants are now going into Somalia. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are in Somalia. So they're getting ready to invade Somalia because a lot of undeveloped natural resources down in Africa, a lot of gold, a lot of stuff, and it's just waiting there. And how dare those African people set up their homes over our natural resources? So,
it's going to happen.
Yep.
There was an article that came out today that NATO has agreed on Afghan troop boost, wrangles with U.S. on specific numbers, and apparently it was the NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg who today confirmed that there had been an agreement at a ministerial level to plan to escalate military involvement in Afghanistan. The exact numbers haven't quite been worked out yet. And so, NATO Secretary General and U.S. SecDef Mattis, I have a word for you. One of the most classic definitions of insanity is doing something precisely the same way over and over, and yet expecting a different outcome. Surges in troop strength come and go, but Afghanistan still remains the graveyard of empires. Alexander the Great was the only military conqueror who was able to hold on to this, and that was only for 3 years. Apparently, the Taliban still control large parts of Afghanistan, and ISIS has established a foothold. Mike, am I crazy on this, or is there no military metric by which the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan can possibly be considered a success unless you want to count the absolute explosion in the production of opium poppies as success?
Well, that's a big part of it, and as a result, we have an opioid problem in the United States, both prescription and illegal. Same thing is happening in Russia.
Yep.
But don't forget, there's that oil pipeline right of way that they got at a discount, and that was really what led to the initial idea to go into Afghanistan. There was a consortium of oil companies that included Unocal, and they wanted a pipeline right of way across Afghanistan, and the Taliban said, sure, here's the cost of a pipeline right of way. And the oil company consortium said, oh, we don't want to pay anywhere near that much. And the Taliban said, it is our country and it's a fair rate. So the consortium goes over to Congress, and they say, we think we need a friendlier government in Afghanistan. And that's where it all... go on in, change the government, put in somebody who will give us our pipeline at a discounted rate. And one of the representatives of Unocal was one Hamid Karzai, who, following the U.S. invasion, was installed as the new U.S. puppet ruler for Afghanistan. So, El Presidente de Unocal.
And it is completely illogical to magically believe that another surge after 16 years is going to have any greater effect than the surges which have preceded it. And, Mike, to me, that is the absolute, utter fallacy of this plan?
Well, they're just hanging on to the ground there. As long as they got that pipeline right of way and where the poppies are growing, they're going to stay there until that last opium poppy has been harvested. And as far as the eastern part of the country, which is militarily the most difficult to control, they may just say, Taliban, you can have that. You can have the desert as long as we've got the oil and the opium. You can have the rest.
Yeah, to me, what makes logical sense is to evacuate U.S. and NATO troops as quickly as safely possible, and then the U.S. and NATO should be negotiating with whatever government is left standing in Kabul.
But there's a problem.
What's the problem?
The Taliban do not agree with the idea of growing opium poppies. Under the Taliban, opium had been eradicated from Afghanistan. You were caught with a poppy, they'd cut your hand off. Draconian, but it worked. And that was really the issue. The American drug lords, and again, if you have not seen it, go over to the History Channel and hunt down America's War on Drugs and watch all 4 segments. That's your homework for the weekend. There's going to be a pop quiz on Monday.
No, there's not.
Yes, there is. It's my show.
Yes,
and
dear, I know.
The CIA, the U.S. government are neck deep in the drug traffic. And the American drug lords needed a source of opium because the opium coming from the Golden Triangle is drying up, and that was a big part of the reason to go into Afghanistan, the oil pipeline right-of-way and securing a new source of opium for America's drug lords. But because the Taliban were opposed to the growing of opium poppies, the Taliban had to be removed. And by the way, this is not the first time one nation has gone to another nation, gone to war with another nation over drugs. Britain actually fought a war with China over Britain's right to sell opium to the Chinese people. And they were actually growing the opium here in the United States. It was a legal crop at the time. Britain would buy it from us. They'd sell it to the Chinese. It led to the opium dens, and ultimately it corrupted the Chinese imperial government so badly, that's what led to the Communist Revolution in China. And, of course, the opium trade in the United States basically worked its magic on our political institutions. Most people do not know that the Skull and Bones fraternity that we mentioned earlier in this...
I'm sorry. I hit my mic.
Please
sorry.
Don't do that.
All right.
The Skull and Bones fraternity at Yale University, which is tied in very much with the CIA, was originally funded on opium money. And again, back then, it was legal, but that's where it came from. They're steeped in opium money. It's called the Russell Trust. And that was where they began. And they're still neck deep with the CIA, which is still neck deep with running cocaine and opium into the United States of America to fund covert operations unapproved by the United States Congress. Again, that's on the History Channel, 4-part show, America's War on Drugs. Each part is 2 hours long, so it's 8 hours of very well-made, very well-edited documentary.
Yeah, it's amazing. It was... And Mike and I know more than a little about the history of this thing, but we were kind of amazed.
Well, yeah, we sort of inadvertently, peripherally got involved again back in 1994 when I stumbled across evidence that White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster had in fact been murdered, and it was covered up with a fake suicide, and got blacklisted out of Hollywood, and all of a sudden I had all this free time on my hands, and I started digging into what was going on. And bit by bit, it all began to surface, and we put it out on the earlier websites, and I wasn't the only one. Other people, like I said, Sally Denton, Roger Morris, their article, The Crimes of Mina. Terry Reid, one of the actual pilots, wrote a book called Compromise, Clinton, Bush, and the CIA. And, of course, we were all called kooks and conspiracy wackos and so forth. And so for us, it is a moment of vindication to see the History Channel actually do this show, where they come on out and say, yes, Barry Seal was smuggling drugs. He was working for the CIA. He was smuggling guns down and drugs back in an illegal covert arming operation to the Nicaraguan Contras, which violated U.S. law. It violated the Boland Amendment and the Logan Act, and it was all being funded with what?
I just sneezed.
Oh.
It's okay.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm dangerous this afternoon.
Yes, you are dangerous
I apologize
this afternoon. It was all funded by literally tons of cocaine. And that's something, especially if you have a family member who has suffered from the curse of drug addiction. Just imagine the government, the United States government, the Central Intelligence Agency, was importing, still is, tons and tons of illegal drugs into this country to sell to our children to make money for whatever it is they feel like doing. And that's why I keep saying what we need right now is a cash for clunkers law for the government itself.
Yes.
We take our old, costly, inefficient, bloated government that doesn't do what we want it to do. We take it to the junkyard. We put it in the little cruncher machine. We crunch it down to a little tiny coffee table. And we all get a check for $20,000 to go out and buy a new, smaller, more efficient government. And I think the time has come for that.
I agree.
All right, what is your next story here?
Well, the next story is Qatar is working with the U.S. and Kuwait on response to Saudi demands. U.S. and Saudi officials are working with the government of Qatar on a formal response to the 13 demands issued last week by Saudi Arabia and its allies against the tiny Gulf nation. The deadline for a response is believed to be Sunday, which is why Mike and I are very nudgy geopolitically about the first part
One of the reasons, not the only one. I'm wondering, how do you say go jump in a lake in Saudi?
You mean in Arabic?
In Arabic.
I don't know, but I'm sure that some of our listeners and readers know how.
And again, complicating this issue is the fact that the United Nations has come on out condemning the Saudi demand that Al Jazeera be shut down.
Yeah. And while all the signs are that the response is going to be some variation on no, Qatari Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdullah Rahman Al Thani appeared to want something a little bit more nuanced. That is to say that his country is open to pursuing negotiations. It's not at all clear, though, that that's an option, as the Saudi government has insisted that demands are non-negotiable, and both Bahrain and the UAE have insisted they'll accept nothing less than an absolute acceptance by Qatar. Now, there are a couple of serious questions that are raised by this right now. The first is, precisely what is Prince bin Salman of Saudi Arabia prepared to actually do if the Qatari government tells him to pound sand?
He's going to do what he was told to do when the deal was made to put him in power.
Is he actually going to go ahead with a physical invasion of Qatar?
He might, and that will bring Saudi Arabia into conflict with both Iran and with possibly Turkey as well.
And secondly, if such an invasion takes place, what orders have been given to the 10,000-plus U.S. military troops working in Qatar to join the Saudis in the invasion against Qatar, or stand down until the dust is settled?
I would imagine that their orders are going to be, forget about waiting for the Saudis, move on the capital.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, and the thing that is so bothersome, Qatar has actually been a very staunch ally of the United States to date. It's done a lot. So what would a U.S.-enabled Saudi invasion of that country look like to both the government of Qatar and the larger Middle East? I have one word for that: betrayal.
Absolutely. Well, look at what we did to Saddam Hussein. They put him in power. Then all of a sudden he sells Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar. They go in and they kill him. The United States is not really a good friend. Any nation that is allied with the United States has to realize that alliance could end on a whim. And Saudi Arabia is the U.S. handmaiden in the Middle East, even more so now under Crown Prince bin Salman. But somebody in that royal family has to have the sense to realize that sooner or later the United States will turn on them.
I mean, in terms of its relationships with various countries, you can't really say that the U.S. has been a friend. It's been a frenemy, morphing into an enemy.
Except, of course, for Israel, which has our politicians by the short and curly.
Yes, that's also real. But, you know, that deadline is coming very close by. And
I'll share a little story with you. And, again, the idea about friends. Most Americans would probably think that the United States and France have been friends at least since the end of World War II, when we saved them from the Nazis, and we have a special debt of honor to the French for helping us out against the British in the Revolution. But the fact of the matter is that the CIA attempted a regime change in France in the late 60s, and it failed miserably, and it was the backflash from that that led France to demand the redemption of all the Federal Reserve notes they had in gold, which in turn forced Nixon to close the gold window, end gold convertibility, the Nixon shock, which in turn led to the rise of the petrodollar deal. So you can see how all this stuff ties together, because history is not just a bunch of individual names, dates, and places. It is this ongoing tangled web of cause and effect.
Well, I know that President Trump is going to be headed to France and to meet with Macron. What do you think the agenda is there?
Getting France back on board with the so-called coalition. Most of the countries in Europe are dealing with populations that are as war-weary as the American people are. And they're trying to figure out how they can sort of get us all riled up again and get our anger directed at these enemies. And it's going to be very difficult to do. And we keep talking about the possibility of another false flag, whether it's a virtual 9/11. It's going to have to be something that is really scary, is really felt everywhere to bring that immediacy home. In the case of 9/11, unless you lived near New York City or in New Jersey, 9/11 was something that happened kind of far away, and you didn't feel the shock and the immediate threat of it. And that's one of the reasons why after 9/11 they shut down all air travel, to try and sort of maximize that psychological impact on the American people. So if they are planning on doing something to get the people of Europe and the people of the United States angry and scared and motivated to go back to supporting the war agenda, it's going to have to be something really nasty.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's why I'm hoping that nothing happens this coming week and with the holiday coming up.
I would agree, but again, you can almost feel the momentum building.
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of time before this happens. It's very frustrating for Claire and I. We've seen this coming for 20 years, and we've been trying to figure out some way to peacefully sort of guide the nation away from a path to World War III. And obviously on that regard, we have failed. And now we're thinking about how are we going to mitigate the damage to it, which is why we're going to be spending a lot more time talking about the need to prep for in the event war comes to our own shores, which I think it well might in this age of various missiles and so forth. And again, my conviction is we're likely to lose this war, and especially for places like here in Hawaii, that means attack and invasion, and plus just if there's a crash of the economy and the government, there's going to be a crash in the supply chain. And you might want to look at what happened to Germany before the surrender, where the stores were empty, the hospitals had no medicine, and there was tremendous hunger, privation, homelessness. You need to be prepared to deal with that as well. I know that Washington, D.C. is caught up in this idea that we've never lost a war. That's not true. We lost in Vietnam. We never won in North Korea. And contrary to the movies and TV shows, we didn't exactly win World War I and World War II all by ourselves.
We had a little help.
We waited till we saw which side was going to win, then we hopped on. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program. Last segment on this Pauhana Friday, and take it away, Claire.
You just have to appreciate the irony in this. A House committee votes to repeal the AUMF, the Authorization for the Use of Military Force, and then had it ruled out of order. In a stunning move, the House Appropriations Committee today approved an amendment to the massive military spending bill by Representative Barbara Lee. The amendment passed in a voice vote and would repeal the 2001 authorization for the use of military force. Now, apparently, Representative Lee has been pushing amendments to try to end America's assorted war. That this one actually made it through committee this time is nothing short of a miracle. But the House Republican leadership was also very quick to insist that the vote didn't actually count. House Republicans are steaming about the Lee Amendment, insisting it cripples the legal basis for all of America's many, many wars, not just at the present, but in the future.
And they're absolutely right. But there's another factor that is not being mentioned in this article, and that is that the original 2001 authorization for the use of military force was illegal for two reasons. The Constitution does not allow Congress to delegate their authority to issue a war declaration, and in any event, the authorization for the use of military force was activated fraudulently, because when President Bush sent his letter of transmittal to Congress saying, I am turning this thing on, it included two lies. It included the claim that Iraq was involved in 9/11 and that Iraq possessed banned weapons of mass destruction. So obviously, if fraud negates consent, and so this was null and void. But don't you just love the way Congress works again? It illustrates something I said before. We're in a country where we're all expected to play by the rules and follow the laws, but the government just does whatever it wants. We've got time for one last phone call. Terry in California, aloha, what's on your mind?
Hey, Claire, I got a question for you. What are these people that are pushing all these wars? What are they planning to do when the nukes start flying? Are they going to just go underground in a hole?
Oh, they've got
for the smoke to clear, and
Terry,
then come out and everything's going to be fine.
Terry, they've got bunkers so deep with top of the line survival equipment. They're not going to have to worry about anything maybe for 10, 20 years.
And you paid for it, of course, but you will not be allowed inside there. And like I said, if we're still alive after it's all over, let's find the bunkers and just cement over the hatches. That's my idea.
Does that include the whole Congress? Does that include the whole Congress and the Republican Party is pushing this? They're going to let all of them in?
No. The continuity of government plan, Mount Weather is where the White House staff goes. The Greenbrier is where Congress goes. I don't know where they're going to sequester the Supreme Court, and frankly, at this point, I don't care. But there are bunkers all over the place. There's one underneath the New Denver Airport. We've got one in the middle of the Ko'olau Mountains here along the H3. They've been building these things for 10 years. When we were still living in Southern California, we could see where they were building some big underground construction underneath the northeast corner of Griffith Park. And they've been digging down and digging all these bunkers and doing all these tunnelings. If you ever hear the story about, the hums, everybody says we're hearing this hums and it sounds like a diesel at idle in a distance. That's a boring machine. And they're digging out more tunnels all underneath the country. Anyway, Terry, got to let you go. There's the music. Time for Claire and I to get on out of here. We have things to do this afternoon, pamphlets to issue, and derbies to smash.
Amen.
We'll be back on Monday. And again on Tuesday, the Lady Claire will be returning on Independence Day. I know a lot of you are already on the holiday weekend. Please be very careful. Drive carefully. Be safe. We'll talk to you on Monday. Aloha, America.